You see, because by most people's standards, there's quite a lot wrong with me. But I see it differently.
What's right with me? What's right with me? What's right with me?
In a world that's constantly telling you how wrong you are, we want to tell you what's right with you. David McKnight is a counselor, speaker, and consultant who helps people discover how they're wired as a person. His concepts have revolutionized how people see themselves once they learn the principles behind what's right about you. Here now is David McKnight.
David, most people don't think they measure up. So often they just plainly don't like themselves. At least that's been my experience. Your gift is to help people find out what's right about them. So what happened in the earlier days that this thing kind of came alive to you?
Well, when I think about it, probably the initial spark that hit me was my dad said to me when I was probably in junior high, said, David, I'd give my right arm to have what you have with people. And that's all he said. But it stuck with me, and I go, okay, what does that mean? So I followed a path that kept me in touch with people, and it brought me to a place after going to college and graduate school and in business and sales, and I was at a point where I came home one day, and I said to my wife, I had a great day today. And she said, well, what did you sell? Meaning, how much money did we make? I said, I didn't sell anything. But there were 6 or 7 people that I introduced them to either an idea, a person, a concept, a job, and it impacted their life in some way. And I realized that was really floating my boat. That was my passion. And so it got me to thinking, what's really going on here? And so I went back to a consulting firm that was now a client that I had worked with about 7 or 8 years before and said, what do you think I should do? Do sales or do people? And they said, we've been waiting for you to call us for 5 years. And so I did a deep dive into their work and their process, and it was all about understanding the design in a person's life. We have a DNA that describes us physically, but there's a DNA that describes our behavior, what it is we're going to do, what results we're seeking, how we communicate, a number of different things, what context we work in, what triggers our motivation, what gets us going, how we work with people, how do we want to be managed, how would we manage. All these factors began to come alive for me, and I realized after interviewing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, everybody's different.
You mentioned to me one time that the other aspect of getting into this kind of how to help people and discover who they are and what's right about them is a leadership component. Tell us a little bit about that. That leadership kind of did something for you to open this door, didn't it?
Yes. Well, I found myself consulting, oftentimes with executive directors or CEOs or people in managing partners. And I was also working with them on how they were designed and seeing that they were leading according to how they were designed, but it was going against the way they were to lead. What do I mean by that? So someone who is, say, supposed to be organizing and be an administrator and making things run smoothly, and yet they're designed to kind of shoot from the hip and see what's happening, go with the flow. And so they can hold that planning part of them, that administrative part, for about 3 weeks, and then they start to creep back into this more seat-of-the-pants kind of leadership. And I saw that really hurting people. So I was working with some ministers who were leading from their design, but it wasn't the kind of thing that was needed in that context. So I began to see people really, whether they know it or not, are leading from the way they were made. And I had an example of it was really kind of profound. A gentleman that I'd worked with here in Minnesota, he was a minister, and he got transferred he went to a church in Cleveland, and he asked me to come out, and I had done his design work, and he had a good sense of what he was all about. So he got there, the first day on the job, he says, can you come to Cleveland and spend time with my leadership? And so I went out and I spent about 3 or 4 days with his leadership team, people that had hired him to come. So we had 30 people in the room at one time. And they hired him to do a certain thing. And yet what the job description has was a lot of administrative, managing, running things. But he was a writer. He was a speaker. He had a radio show. He had a whole nother way to bring his leadership out. And I exposed them to the fact that, You know, if you let him do what he's designed to do, you'll get more bang for your buck than if you try to squeeze him into this administrative role. And I said, you've got someone sitting in your pew that can do this administrative task with their eyes closed. Well, that had never occurred to them. He sent me a letter about 6 weeks later after that meeting. He said, I just advanced his work 2 years because it would have taken him that long to educate his people. And off he went.
Again, that brings me back to the whole idea that you say that 7 out of 10 people are not motivated nor competent to perform the basic requirements of their job. So that kind of fits in with your story, but explain it more.
Well, we've all gone to school. We all have had teachers. Think back, how many teachers did you have who you knew they loved to teach? Teaching was a part of who they were. They were gifted, you learned, you couldn't wait to go to class. And I look back on that, and I don't know, through all the different educational processes, I probably had maybe 4 or 5 teachers out of 30 or 40 maybe that I were really good at their job. The rest of them they were adequate, they were going through the motions, but there were those teachers that taught you. And that kind of goes almost in every segment. There are people who can do a job. I can do it, but you can tell if someone really is doing it from the heart, from who they are. It's tapping who they are. You know, and part of what I do, I am retained by an organization to come in and be employee coach. And so I'm working with men and women who are doing rather routine, ordinary things. And so I ask them, what's right about you? We go through that process, and they begin to see how it is that they actually do this job that would seem menial. I've worked with hotel workers and people who are housekeeping, and we think, well, there's some people who are gifted at doing that. You know, they go into that room and they clean it. You know, they lay down on the bed and they get a view of what the next person's going to be. They care about their job because it's coming out of their design. It taps into who they are. So we can all do jobs. We all have can-do abilities, but our jobs not always are tapping into what we're really motivated to do, what we're really designed to do. So I want people to have a better understanding of what that is so that they can overmanage themselves.
This next question may fly up in the face of people who are motivational speakers, but it is a myth. You say it's a myth, and here is the myth, that we're taught to believe we can become anything we want to be. Yet, I think that this could be a motivation for some people, but you say it's a myth. Why?
I think you can be anything you want to be as long as it's what you're designed to be. You know, if we were to look at these motivational speakers, you will find if we could kind of go behind the curtain and look at their design, they're doing exactly what they're designed to do. But they're trying to tell us we can do the same thing. And I've been to conferences over and over again where people come and I want to be just like the person on stage, yet we don't know the design of that person. So we go out and try to copy what that person is doing. I was in insurance business for many years, or 15 years or so, and I saw men come and go, and I saw management trying to put people into a box, and everybody's trying to bend to fit the box, but it doesn't work. There's about 8 or 10 different ways a person can sell, all the way from overt selling to what they consider nursing, coming alongside and nursing someone along and influencing them. There's lots of ways to do that. One of the foremost leaders in thinking and leadership and management is Peter Drucker. And Peter said in his classes, his graduate school that he was teaching, most of his students would not have a clue at what they were good at, nor would they have a clue as to what they needed to work on to strengthen their gifts or their strengths or where their weaknesses are. They're just there to do it. I've worked with graduate students and have them say, how many can tell me what you're going to be doing in 5 years? And out of 15 or 20 in the room, 3 can say, I am going to be doing this. Because those people know how they're designed and the context they're going into. The rest of them said, well, I'll be doing my job. And I said to them, well, you'll be trying to figure out how to get out of your job because you're not going to be doing a good one.
You know, David, I love the name of your business, What is Right About You. I just love that. There's just something missing in all of society, regardless of where that may be, that we get the right kind of information about who we are. So if what's right about me is very important, how do I begin to find out how I am designed? What's your process?
Well, it's been a long process of observation and interviewing and listening, but I come away with a few keys. Sometimes I will go into a contentious situation in an organization and I do mediation. So I've got 2 sides that don't like each other. So what I begin to do is I begin listening to the active verbs they're using as they're describing what it is that's important to them. That gives me a key to what's important to them. And then I begin to parrot those words back. And when I begin to do that, they begin to listen. It's uncanny. I came across this very early on when my child was born, and I watched her at age 2 or 3 begin to share with us words that were important to her but had no meaning for me or my wife. And I realized those are her words. So if I parrot them back to her, what's going to happen? And whenever I did that, I had her undivided attention. She's 26 years old, and the same thing still works today. So that design, there's something we do every day that we're trying to get at. So it's kind of the ultimate result we're trying to achieve. And we have abilities that are highly motivated by us, part of our design. And then we have these, what I call can-do abilities. Yeah, I can do that, but only for a period of time. But I am really motivated here. Then there's subject matter that we like to use and work with, tangible or intangible things. And then there's circumstances that we work best in, the context, what results we're trying to achieve, all these things. And it starts with listening to those active verbs. Now we have a lot of assessment processes available today that weren't available 40 years ago that begin to tap into that. So I've used Strength Finder of late because it gives me 5 words that I can now know. I trust those words, and behind those words are stories that back up why that word is there. So I call them doors to knock on. So when someone gives me their 5 words, I want to knock on that door and see what's behind it. So there's stories, there's actual achievements in their life that tells me why they are that way. Here's an example. I recently, a couple years ago, started working with a trainer, personal trainer, not in good shape. I needed to get going. And so I started working with this lady. The first thing she did, we sat down and we talked for an hour. And I wanted to kind of prove to her that I was not a rookie at this getting better business, getting physically fit. So I pulled out my phone and I showed her a picture of me running a marathon 30 years ago. And she looked at me and she says, I can bring that guy back. Well, that got my attention. So about 3 or 4 sessions into our working out together, I asked her, have you ever done Strength Finder? She says, yeah, I have. Well, I said, give me your strengths. Well, one of them that popped out, 2 of them was responsibility and restoration. And what she said to me very subtly was, when she says, I can bring it back, I can restore that person. I can restore you. So I pointed that out to her. I says, do you realize what you're doing to me? You're providing restoration. And she had never considered. Here she is a personal trainer, but her whole desire is to restore people to health. And everybody has got something that's unique about them. I've gone into men who are incarcerated. Life's tough for them. And we begin to say, there's something right about you. Let's try to discover what that is. And so there's stories in people's lives that what things they've done well, felt they've done well, what was satisfying to them. And that begins to give you the evidence. It gives you the active verbs, gives you the subject matter, gives you information on how they work or don't work. So there's evidence in everybody. I tell parents that your children are asking 3 questions. Is this safe? Do I have something? Am I unique? And will I have significance? And I say, parents, your children are not whiteboards to write on, but they're books to be read. So if you go into that attitude with everybody you're with, here's another book to be read. Not something I want to impress or write on or try to manipulate, but there's something, if I can find out what's right about you, we can get a lot done. We can do things. So there's ways to get at it. We have a lot of assessment processes that help. I like Strength Finder. It's simple. It gives me 5 words, and I believe those words. I trust those words, and I start to look for evidence.
Well, I'm a testimony of that because you helped me with the assessment, and one of my words is context. And to go a little bit further than what's right about us, my marriage has improved because now my wife understands, instead of just giving me some information, she has to apply the context to it, then I understand. So this thing is not just for only individuals, but it can be very helpful for marriages as well.
So I've worked in organizations, and oftentimes an executive or people I'm working with, hey, could you talk to me and my wife, or can you work with my son or daughter, and they're getting married? And it's really the best to have someone else to bounce things off of, because I can't read my own story. You can read my story better than I can read my own, because I just assume, if I don't have any other information, that everybody's the same and that person's just lucky or that person had that advantage. But no, I've got a unique way of doing things. And there's a flip side to this design thing. We can sabotage ourselves by getting compulsive. So say, I've got the gift of responsibility. Well, if I don't manage that properly, I'll take responsibility for things that are not my responsibility. And that's sometimes like I'm crawling over to my cubicle, get into someone else's cubicle, because I feel a sense of responsibility. So it's understanding really what your gift is and what context you're working in. Now, Why is it that you see some people seem to know what they're all about and they just say, I'm going to be a doctor, and off they go and they're a doctor or some other field? Well, the context in which they were raised in probably drew out of them this design, and they got some affirmation for that. Most people, like maybe use the statistic 7 out of 10, had no one saying to them, you've got a gift, you've got ability, you've got a way to go, like those men in prison. See, no one ever told me. No one ever told me I could do this. I never saw it. I didn't have anybody there to help me. And so there are more of those people today than maybe ever. I don't know. But my passion is I want people to know there's something right about them. So when I approach somebody, I meet somebody, I'm in a room with people, I know that there's something right about everybody here. And that changes your perspective on people. You see somebody doing something you think is off. Well, I'd say to them, to people around, that person's operating out of their design. They may not know it. And oftentimes when people are about to lose their job and I'm invited in to try to fix things, they're working harder than ever, doing exactly what they're designed to do, but it's not what the context is asking for, so they're kind of digging their own ditch.
Well, I just love this idea. What's right about you? I mean, I can imagine that most people have never thought about that. So let's talk for a little bit, sort of in bullet points, about the characteristics of design. Let's start with design is enduring. Tell us about that.
I believe we have it when we're born. It's something that's been put into us, much like our own DNA that says, I've got these fingerprints and no one else does. And it begins to manifest itself over time. And I don't believe, in essence, if my stripes go up and down, they're ever going to go sideways. My gifts, my design, my strengths, that, however you want to name that, I either develop them or I don't. Or I try to be somebody other than myself. But it's kind of like bobbing for apples. The apple's always going to try to come to the top. It's always a ping pong ball. It's always going to try to rise out of the water. And there really isn't anything you can do to stop it. It just keeps showing up. Now, for many people, this thing, their design shows up, and no one honored it as a child. No one says, hey, that's a good thing. So you're trying to force it down so you can be something you think you should be. And when people realize, that's who I am, there's freedom in that. I've worked with a lot of couples, and I'll tell a wife, that thing about your husband you're not so happy about, that's his gift. Honor it, and have them come back later and say, ever since I did that, it's a different marriage. I got it the other way around. I tell husbands, just honor that which you see in your wife and watch what happens. But most of us have been told, sit down and shut up, be quiet. And so that gift of ours just, we're sitting on it.
Right. Well, can you tell my wife that, please, and let her know that
All right.
all my idiosyncrasies are my gifts?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk just quickly about design remains stable yet continues to develop.
Well, the idea that it's there, it's like a GPS in our phone. It's there. You got to turn it on and use it if you want the effectiveness of that ability. But it's there. It's going to stay with you the rest of your life. And the more you are aware of it, the better. My wife, one of the gifts was strategy. She was very strategic. And so the more I talked about that with her, the more I reminded her of that, the more that gift began to show up. She began to kind of take ownership of that. When my daughter was 14, I had her do the Strength Finder. She came up with 5 words. I said to her, now those words are yours to own. You have to own those words. They're yours. It's like someone gave you acreage to plant and farm and grow things. It's yours. If you don't do it, it won't happen. So, we think of the skinny guy who gets sand kicked in his face at the beach, and then the next summer he comes back and he's all muscular. What happened was he developed the muscles that he had. He didn't get new muscles. He developed the ones that he had. So we have this, and that's why it's so effective to have people know each other. I try to work with organizations and create a culture of honor, and you do that by honoring the gifts and the strengths and what's right about people.
Design also is irrepressible. What does that mean?
You can't shut it down. It will find a way to find its way forward. And that's why it's important that you know what it is so that you can manage it. It doesn't manage you. That's like the tail wagging the dog. So I got a gift of competition. Well, there's a place for competition and there's a place not for it. It isn't for every situation you're in, but it really shines when you're in a competitive environment, when the rules are clear and you can go for it. But to bring it into a different kind of context, it can be the death of you.
Well, this next one I like. Design explains what we do not do.
I think in my own situation, I'm much more of an activator. We're going to go west. Well, let's get in the car and go. And I began to realize, there are those people that would get a map out and plan things and organize, and that works really well. And as much as I want to do that. My inclination is to just go. But I've come to really appreciate those people that do plan, so I want to have them around me when I do that.
Another one, David, is design actively seeks expression.
We have this desire to be known, and so we will, whether we are aware of it or not, it'll show up. It'll seek expression. Like that trainer I had, she was telling me she's all about restoration without ever using the words restoration. It was in the career she chose, and it was the way she went about things, but she never used restore or restoration in her conversation. But it found expression. So when I pointed that out, she's now moving on to be more than just a personal trainer. She's going to be the director of healthy living, responsible for over 100 people now. And so she really has a chance to restore more than one person.
Lastly, design shapes our perception as well as our social behavior. So it's just how we interact with life.
Yeah, I say there are those who are extroverted and those who are more covert or overt. Some people want to work behind the curtain, and they're very happy to be behind the curtain. They don't need to be out on stage. And then there are others who are seeking the spotlight, and that's a good thing. You know, all these strengths that the Strength Finder points out, they're all good. There's not a bad one. But if you get compulsive with a strength, that's when things go awry. So when I'm invited into those tough situations, I know we've got what's right about somebody is on steroids, and we have to identify it and then help them understand how to manage it, pull it back, and then things usually begin to work out much smoother.
So at the end of the day, David, what's right about you is discovered by understanding your design. So how does a person get started?
Well, I would tell you simply go buy a Strength Finder book and believe what it tells you, because they did an awful lot of study on that before they ever brought it out to the marketplace. 20, 30 years of research went into that. Now, it doesn't solve all problems, but it gives you enough information to begin to understand yourself and those you're with. My whole family's done it. We often sit down and say, all right, so let's talk about who's gifted here and what we need to do, or why are things out of whack, and we can begin to look at somebody's gift is taken over and we have to kind of dial it back. So just take a test. That's the thing. You have to believe there's something right about everybody. That begins to change everything. I mean, I've had psychologists invite me into their counseling room because they know I see their client differently. I'm looking at what's right about that person and trying to unpack it and discover it, when they're oftentimes seeing what's wrong and then how do we fix it. So oftentimes fixing what's wrong with me goes to let's find out what's right, and that'll give us evidence for where to go to fix what's wrong.
You know, David, I think this is so seminal. It's so important to understanding relationships. I mean, for businesses, when they're hiring people, to understand what are we getting in this person, or church staffs, you know, when you're looking for a pastor, a staff pastor, what kind of person best fits into the personalities that are already here, the environment. And as far as even marriage, you know, when we're thinking about getting married, if we're at that stage of our lives, what kind of person are we marrying? What are some of the things that I can know before going in so I understand how they're designed?
The couples that I've worked with, we've generally come up with some ahas that if hadn't been discovered could have been real stumbling blocks for them down the road. I think of one couple, the wife-to-be had wonderful gifts in the order of getting things done, executing, let's get it going. And her husband-to-be had, I think, 3 or 4 in that column, but he had a couple in another column in terms of strategy, thinking about how to get it done. And so she was, let's get it done, and yet he needed to think about it a little bit. And so she couldn't understand why he needed to think about it, because she was going to get it done. So her job, the context she was in there, her strengths just were a perfect fit for her. She got her job done, but when she would bring that same thing home with the same anticipation or assumption that it was going to work there, she realized as they talked with one another, he needed a little more information. He needed to think about it. He needed to strategize a little bit. And once he got the information he needed, then he was all about getting it done. So in the end, that was going to happen, but they realized that things were frustrating. But once we began to unpack all that, there was an aha, and they began to appreciate each other much better.
So, David, you're available for consultation. You're available to interpret the Strengths Finder. You do seminars for businesses, for churches, for conventions, for marriage counseling, all these things depending upon the situation. How do people get a hold of you?
My email address is mcknight.group@yahoo.com.
If you would like to know more about what you've heard today, you can contact David McKnight by calling 612-990-6585 6604. Again, that number is 612 990 6604.